Hello and welcome to the What's Up Doc podcast. I'm Jeff Booth with my co-host Colissa Pollard. Hey, Colissa.
Hey, Jeff. How's it going?
Doing good. It's been a while since we've done this, and so we're excited to get back in the saddle. And we have a great guest, Nick Pombonyo, that I'm saying correctly now. He's the director of logistics from Drive DeVilbiss Healthcare. So a lot of hard ones there trying to stump me at the beginning. Nick, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being with us. And we just want to know right away, how'd you get started in logistics? How'd you get here?
Absolutely. And thanks for having me. It's been listening for a little while now, and it's great to be on. But I sort of fell into logistics. It wasn't a straightforward path as some may travel on. I actually studied neuroscience in my undergraduate degree, and I was pre-med and veered off that path. And the first business job that I got out of college was in operations and supply chain. So started in manufacturing and then kind of transitioned into warehouse operations and end-to-end supply chain, purchasing, procurement, bounced around a little bit at some smaller companies. And then when I took my position at Drive, that was my first logistics focused role. So it took a lot of my experience at smaller businesses on both the international and the domestic freight side and was able to make that a more focused career in the logistics industry.
I think that's the common story of none of us tried to get here. We all just ended up here, right? No one grows up thinking, I want to be a supply chain professional or a logistician. And maybe now it's starting to happen because there are degrees at school for that. But everyone seems to fall into it. Although I can't say we've ever heard from pre-med to supply chain. So I'd say you're officially a first on that one, especially anything of like neuroscience interest. So that's congratulations. You're our first version that we've heard of that story. So that's pretty amazing. Colissa, you're from non-traditional logistics, and we always talk about like how you got into this. Have we talked to anyone that's had pre-med or come from the medical world at all?
No, but it looks like, Nick, you have a master's in psychology and organizational development.
Yeah, so that was my way of trying to bridge the gap from a medical background to a more industrial business side of things. So I actually, right out of college, I started working at Drive. Actually, this is my second stint with Drive, and I was bridging the gap from that neuroscience background to the business side of things, and got that master's in applied psychology, but focused in organizational development. So that was my transition. And then the only reason I left Drive was a personal relocation to Florida, where I am now. And then during the pandemic, they opened up their workforce to be more open to remote work. And I saw the opening and was eager to get back on board because I loved working for the company. So in totality, been with Drive for about 4 years, but this is 3 years on my second term.
That's awesome. I like that second term. No, but I'm really curious about that. What made you, and this is totally like off topic supply chain, what made you choose that degree? Right. I think, a lot of people would choose maybe like an MBA might be more traditional. Colissa went back for a master's of, was it data science or analytics? What was your degree, Colissa?
Yeah, management information systems with a focus on data science. Yeah.
The MIS and data science. And so what made you choose the psychology and org effectiveness, org design stuff, Nick?
Yeah. So like I said, I was coming from a background that I didn't know a whole lot about business or how those careers would end up working for me. And coming from a family, my dad was blue collar, my mom was a teacher, so civil service and blue collar. I wasn't exposed to it much as a kid, but I knew that I liked working with people and I liked to lead people. And whichever industry, whichever area of business I ended up being in, I knew that I wanted to be in a leadership role. So that degree had a strong focus on working with people, how to motivate people, get the most out of your people, and it really helped to create a strong foundation for me in my current leadership roles. I didn't know where it was going to take me, but I knew I wanted to end up in a leadership position. So that was some of the thought process behind pursuing that degree.
That's awesome. So overall, though, right choice at the beginning, maybe a little unclear, but now you're like, you know what? That had a lot of value.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's something that could have been applied to any space that I was in, and it's working really well for me right now.
That's awesome. That's really cool. That is certainly, yeah. We talk about unique paths to where you are now as a director of logistics. Like that has got to be one of the more unique ones we've heard.
Yeah.
And more specifically now in your kind of day-to-day logistics and medical equipment. Like obviously you come from a little bit of medical background wanting to be pre-med there. But what is involved in the logistics of medical equipment? Like what are some of the things you deal with that the average person just would not consider, would not think about? What are some of those hurdles you have to overcome from a logistics perspective?
Yeah, I think in logistics, regardless of the industry, you tend to get a little bit of tunnel vision, and at the end of the day, what you're moving turns into a widget, and you're moving boxes, right? And because of the industry that we're in the medical space, we have to remind ourselves to take that step back and remember the type of product that we're moving and what the importance is to our customers. It's challenging at times because you are moving boxes, right? You're trying to ship boxes at the end of the day. But when you look at the items on an order, whether it's a respiratory item that someone needs to get the treatment on their, to assist their breathing and their day-to-day livelihood because of a issue that they've had, or a wheelchair that someone needs to get released from the hospital. There's a level of importance and a level of responsibility that we have to ship the products that we stock, to ship them with damage-free, on time, and as cost-effective as possible, because a lot of medical equipment is for the elderly and people that don't have as lucrative incomes anymore. So we really have to focus on concentrating on what is in the box, and remembering that medical equipment there's a responsibility that we have to service our customers well. And if you think about durable medical equipment, the space that we play in, they're not the most shipping friendly items. They're larger. They don't have to be heavy, right? So they're not very dense. So on the inbound and the outbound side, they're not the most shipping friendly items, but again, we have that obligation to get as creative as possible to make sure that we're shipping as cost effectively as possible.
Yeah, you kind of have the multifaceted challenge. It's like we need to be there on time because people's lives are involved. Quality is paramount because if you have a damaged equipment, it's going to be unusable. And then the cost perspective, right? Hospitals are not typically running at these huge margins, patients in particular. And so you've kind of got three factors there to deal with. And usually places have one or two of those, right? They have some combination. And then you layer in the equipment. What's the strangest or hardest equipment ship? Is it like a wheelchair where it's like, it's kind of heavy, but takes up space? I know they're collapsible, but like what's the hardest or most challenging?
So some of the more challenging ones, they're called bariatric lifts. If you think about it, it's essentially a crane, essentially, for someone who's a little bit larger and can't get out of bed, or who has had surgery and can't get out of bed. And it's a kind of like a hook and a sling that goes underneath the patient and lifts them up out of bed. And they're not, because of the size and because of the customer they're going to, we try to ship them as assembled as you can, so it's not coming in a bunch of parts. So it's a bigger, heavier item that we have to ship. That's one of the more challenging ones. But, a lot of our products they take up a lot of space and they don't weigh a lot. So those are the challenging ones, because that's not what the carriers want. The carriers want small and dense, not large and light. From a cost perspective, those are the more challenging ones. But just from an execution standpoint, the bariatric lifts are some of the harder items.
Yeah. So I don't think people who are as familiar with LTL or things like that might understand that concept. So why do carriers prefer small and dense versus large and light? Like what are some of the things that go into that in a pricing perspective? Like why is that something carriers prefer? And that's something we always talked about when we train new professionals in the logistics space, that imagine a truck full of ping pong balls or, a truck full of water bottles, like very different weights, but they take up the same amount of space. And you're like, but if you were only charging per pound, then which would you rather take? So some of those dynamics, can you kind of talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's funny. I always taught a similar analogy when I first got into the field of 1,000 pounds of pillows versus 1,000 pounds of bricks, and the amount of space that it takes up on the truck, right? So those pillows may take up 3 or 4 trucks that weigh the same amount as half a truck of bricks. So really compensating the carriers for the space that they're using, the amount of equipment that they have to use, and ultimately the class that it ships under as well. Those things are important. So things that are large and don't weigh a lot tend to ship less favorably than something more dense like an iPhone box or something like that, right? So yeah, a lot of our product, we do have some small products that ship well, but a lot of the larger products, if you think of hospital beds, wheelchairs, walkers, they're not the most friendly shapes, and they're not the most friendly densities. So we do work with our partners and express the importance of our products to our partners too, because it's rewarding for our partners to help serve the community in the same way that we do and service customers that need these products. So there's a lot of value on both ends of the equation.
Yeah, for sure. I think that density component is one that just people miss a lot, and there's a real cost factor associated with it, right?
Absolutely.
Even if your truck reduces the weight, right? The pillows, you mentioned being spread across 4 trucks, you might only have 250 pounds of weight, but your gas mileage doesn't greatly improve. Yes. Your wear and tear on your tires, you're getting some improvement from a lighter weight, but not enough that offsets the fixed cost of a person driving that truck and the gas to just turn it on and operate it even empty. And so that's why there's volume-based pricing, right? In that exciting world. Yeah.
And to your point, you brought up fuel last year when fuel was, leaps and bounds above where it is now. The more trucks you're touching and the larger your products and the more equipment you have to touch, that impact of fuel could radiate throughout your outbound or inbound, your domestic shipping as well. So that was something that we had to make sure we tracked and had good data on to make sure we were making the best decisions possible.
Yeah, so that's a good highlight on data. Colissa, I know you're a data junkie. I'm more of an Excel nerd than a data junkie, but Colissa, when you think about like shipping data or even data we provide out of Opendock or any of those things, like what are some data questions like that you think about, or some data topics? Because I'm really curious from Nick's perspective too of, what data points are helpful for you when you talk about data in the supply chain. Like, what is he interested in? But what are some of the things that jump out to you, Colissa?
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about how I'm not as familiar with how we actually rate any of the shipments that go in and out. We handle mostly the appointment side of it. So a lot of the time we don't actually know how much or, the cost of actually shipping that item. And that's fascinating to me. So I haven't even thought about it. It's obviously the weight plus the cost of gas and all of that other stuff. So that's the kind of data that I would love to see and actually understand. But yeah, really from our end, the only data element that we contribute are just detention fees, probably, right? Where or whatever punitive like on time damage claims, we might track some of that. But that's really all we get sight into. We don't get to hear much about the rating side or even just some of the capacity planning side. So Nick, in your world, what are some of those big data elements when you talk about using data to help manage your supply chain? What are some of those things that really stand out to you as like, whether they're important KPI or just things that really help you run your business day to day?
Yeah, and data is an interesting topic because we've really made a effort the past 6 months to a year we've always had data, reliable data, but we're trying to peel the onion a little bit more, right? Because there's always more granular data that we can mine. There's always more accurate data that we can mine, and trying to get to, right, we measure KPIs, but what are the most fundamental pieces of those KPIs? And seeing those coming further in advance helps us to make more proactive decisions rather than reactive decisions. So a lot of the KPIs that we focus on, you mentioned some good ones, right? They do involve rate and the weights that we have and the classifications of our shipments. But at the end of the day, we want to know how they impact our P&L, right? So essentially making sure that we're doing our due diligence to understand our financial KPIs and our service KPIs, right? That's a big one for us as well. Like we talked about, making sure that we understand our costs. That's the big piece. Not necessarily, there are some things that we may not be able to adjust as frequently, but that we understand at the most intimate level where the costs are coming from. And then also the big ones are our service KPIs, making sure that we're holding our carriers accountable for on-time delivery and delivery issues or appointment responsiveness and things like that, because we're pretty picky with our service providers because we have that obligation to our customers, and we want to make sure that we hold them to a high standard and our customers get the service that they deserve.
And that's awesome. And I think we talked a little bit around some of your background and maybe even from your collegiate background, but what are some of the tools, or what are the things that you use to get experience with data? Like, are you an Excel nerd yourself? Is the data fed to you? Did you have some background in building yourself? Kind of, what does that look like?
Yeah, I am an Excel nerd, and because of my kind of unique path to where I am now, right? Starting as an analyst, I was responsible for a lot of the foundation of what we're doing now, right? So there are 2 analysts on our team now, and they're great at what they do. And having been in the weeds myself helps me to work with them more intimately to kind of pave the direction that we're looking for in our data and what we're presenting to our executive leadership team. So I think that experience in the same company at that granular level has helped me to work with our team on a day-to-day basis and deliver what we feel are positive results for our executive leadership team.
That's awesome. Really curious, or Colissa, anything you have to add on that before I start jumping into all kinds of questions of areas I have no clue about, so I have a ton of interest?
No, please go.
Okay, so Nick, you guys deal with importing from overseas. And so, kind of we talked about in our prep call of container rates, things like that market. It's a world that I don't think Colissa and I are familiar with at all. So can you give us just like a basic overview of container rates, and then maybe what sort of happened pre-pandemic, during pandemic, and now to where we are today? Like as high level, or explain to us like we're 5 as you can, because we don't have that kind of background.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's interesting is you'll see the ripple effect of the ocean side here in the United States on truckload, LTL, parcel, all those things about 4 months later, because it is impacted. Everything's directly impacted, and it all starts overseas. So what you saw was there was some normalcy in the ocean, international shipping market. When I'm talking right now, I'll just put the asterisk next to it that I'm referring to Trans-Pacific. So anything coming from, China, Taiwan, Vietnam, the Asia area over to the United States. So there was some normalcy for quite some time. Of course, there were some peaks and valleys. And then when the pandemic hit, people had more money in some ways, and they used that money to buy things. And where do things come from? A lot of it comes overseas, right? So when people weren't spending as much money on travel and things like that, experiences, because things were shut down, they were buying furniture, new office equipment, new computers, whatever retail item that you could think of. So with that became a significant spike in demand, which drove container rates, 10 times what they were. And that was a challenge for every industry, right? Because at that time, space was very tight, and the carriers could charge essentially whatever they wanted to for space. And if you didn't want to pay that, then someone else did to get their inventory. So shippers lost a lot of the leverage, and companies did what they had to do just to get inventory stateside. And then when it got stateside, the ports were so congested because of all of this new volume that it was sitting, and this is what made kind of the mainstream media. The ports were congested out in LA and New York and Savannah, and Canada had some issues as well, right? And all of these vessels were sitting out there. So people were paying a premium to get their items here, and then it was taking another 60 days to get it off the boat. So it put a lot of people in some challenging positions. And then last year, what happened was the demand shut off quicker than a lot of retail companies were expecting. And their warehouses were full. So when warehouses are full, they weren't ordering as much from overseas. the demand softened significantly and the rates came down with it. So now we're in essentially a pre-pandemic cycle again. We'll see how that shapes out the rest of the year, but the spot market rates are similar to what people experienced pre-pandemic. And shippers have a little bit more leverage again. And what we learned throughout that process is the strength in partnerships and the difference between a service provider and a partner. Because there were service providers that would make less mutual decisions in order to get the best out of the rate. But we had some really strong partners that were working with and for us to help us in any way we can through the whole situation, because it truly was a global event, and no one, it was uncharted waters. No one had ever seen rates that high. So that was a big distinction for us. Who are our service providers and who are our partners that'll help us achieve our goals.
That's awesome. That's a good breakdown. So what's the rate today and what was the peak rate, to give people, something to anchor to? What are you paying today for a container? And then when it was crazy, what was that? What was the highest rate you saw?
So there are some indexes out there. I can't share the exact numbers because we're still in our negotiation season, but
okay.
Picture, the highest I saw was around $25,000.
Okay. And then a standard pandemic rate, but pre-pandemic rate might have been somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000 a container.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah,
so,
that's about right.
That's a pretty big deal, right? You get to $25,000 a container, and then people start thinking about like, oh, how do costs go up? Why do my costs go up? And it's like, well, that container only fits a finite amount of things. So now it costs $20,000 more. So if that's filled with, one car, then you kind of need to push that into the car. If it's across 20,000 water bottles, they each need to take an extra dollar of cost to offset what you just paid for.
Absolutely. And there were, it impacted every mode of freight too, right? Air freight went up because people couldn't get space on boats and they saw the delays, so they paid for air freight to get it over. There was a lot of impact over the period of time that people had challenges, right? And that's not cost that anyone could have foreseen because of how quickly it escalated. So again, we worked with partners who helped us to get as aggressive on the pricing as they could and help us to manage through that situation so that we weren't paying the premium rates like some other people had to.
Yeah. So you were talking about how, your inventory fluctuated so much. So now at this point, how do you balance between maintaining optimal inventory levels and then also meeting the demands of your customers?
Yeah, our planning team does a really great job of measuring those demand signals, and communication is the biggest piece there, right? I think it impacts communication across our entire business, from the commercial side to the planning side to the logistics side, all the way to the DC operations. So we've really focused on frequent touch points and communication to make sure that the demand signals are aligned and we're all in communication with our deliverables. And if something's changing, logistics is downstream, warehouse operations is downstream. We can anticipate the impact and adjust with our partners based on the actions that our planning team is making with our manufacturers. So, there's a lot of communication and a lot of detail orientation that goes into it. And our team does a great job of keeping us in the loop on it.
Yeah, the logistics market always fascinates me. It's always right. It's one of the best examples of, an economic exercise of supply and demand. And then it starts getting into, it's also cyclical. And so you get into these weird situations where, what if we could all just step back and agree to anchor this on some sort of cost and be fine? But somebody has to kind of make the first move at that. It feels like every time, and I see this in the truckload freight market, it's like every time someone has the chance, it's like they really leverage the other side to the max. So it's like, scarcity. All right, trucks are going to get theirs now to make up for the last season. And then now we're the other side of it, where there's excess capacity, and the shippers are going to drive that down until enough trucking companies park their trucks, go out of business. It'll flip and send it back. But like, these are just the kind of the whipsaws of supply and demand and like very real life capacity constraints. Yeah.
And that's, you'll see that on the ocean side too. So that exact dynamic, it's very polarizing, right? And the pendulum does swing pretty dramatically. And realistically, what's best for the industry is somewhere in the middle, right? Shippers need to ship, but they also need people in business to ship their products. So there's a lot of conversation. And actually at TPM out in California, the big ocean conference, there was a lot of conversation around that exactly, making sure that no one on either side of the equation is getting too aggressive to start putting people out of business. Like you said, people are parking their trucks, etc. You don't want that, because then the pendulum swings right back in the other direction. So hopefully the market figures itself out in the next year, and we don't see it swing back to the unfavorable market that shippers had last year. But there's still a lot of time left in the year.
And there's always the perspective, like the market will correct it, right? The market will help manage this. But also, like for individual companies, it's not like you're bidding this or buying this day to day. And you're signing contracts in multi-year, at least single year, but oftentimes multi-year contracts. And so if you start at the wrong side of the cycle for either side, that first 6 months of your rates are fine. And then the last 6 months, one side is upside down. And like these long rating cycles, that's a real output of, this day-to-day market change. But it's not like a stock price where every day from 8 to 5 you have the ability to adjust it, right? It's you're trying to guess what's going to happen over the next 12 to 18 months. And you see this in other markets, like hedging fuel for airlines, hedging fuel costs. Like it's crazy like the number of financial vehicles and variables you have to think of how to just stay stable during these ups and downs.
So is it worth breaking the contract in order to get better rates somewhere else, or how does that kind of work?
And that's, there's a lot of debate that goes around that. I know. But those are the conversations, right, that the industry needs to have. And I think people at both sides of the table need to have those conversations on what contracts mean. And on the, I'm sure you guys see it on your side too, but sometimes not that they're like ripped up and broken away, but there's more leniency on occasion than either side wants. So I think those are important conversations for the industry to have and to kind of come together and make sure that each side's held accountable for making sure that they're doing their part to keep goods moving throughout the country.
Yeah, the contract's a lot more of, to me, I've always read it as like, in many cases, in those situations, it's a best effort, right? There's not a ton of teeth to it. Like I can think of truckload RFPs where you bid on a lane because you expect a density of 500 loads for the year. And so in your head, you're like, okay, that's 10 a week. We have the density for that. And our trucks will give us this competitive rate if we're keeping 10 of their trucks busy. But all of a sudden you're meeting this rate. And then you're 6 months in, you're like, guys, we've only moved 40 shipments. I thought you said 500. Our pricing was based on 500. Like, I imagine it'd be similar to like if I went and shopped Costco and I bought all these big packages and I got there and I said, I actually just want this one bottle of soda. I just want it at the per unit cost as if I was buying the 500. The people at Costco would be like, dude, that's not a thing. Like you can't do that. You got to go. But that is really what happens. Nick, I don't want to, I'm not in this world anymore. So I feel comfortable like
sure,
kind of talking about it tongue in cheek. So I don't want to drag you into this depth, but like, do you have any thoughts or insight on that?
Well, I think the big piece there, and this goes across any industry and any business, is logistics in general is very volume dependent, right? So like you said, a lot of those conversations, are based on volume projections either way, right? And sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down, and that's where some of those challenges happen. So trying to do the best to forecast as best as possible. Again, on both sides probably helps to meet somewhere in the middle, right? And that's again circling back to that partner equation and who's going to partner with us and understand that sometimes our forecast will be a little off, and who are we choosing to partner with to understand that sometimes things change on their end too. And I think you find the service providers ripping up the contracts a little more than the partners to Colissa's point. So we're really investing in making in our business partners and making sure that we're doing right by them so they do right by us.
That's awesome. And so, that's one side of the equation that you can't control as well. But one of the sides you can control more are things like, some of the creative solutions of how to minimize cost. And I think you touched on a couple of those when we talked earlier, but whether it's things like pool distribution or, density on lanes to reduce impact of like spot, like you'll commit to a truck every day, every week, even if it's a partial, or aggregating shipments. Can you talk about like some of those strategies you guys use? And again, like those coloring book terms, when people say pool distribution, like what does that mean? And why is that an effective tool?
Yeah, I think that people or shippers do have the obligation just to look at all options, right? And there are so many, like you said, coloring book terms out there, and so many shipment strategies and creative solutions that people can have, and understanding what's not necessarily best for your business, but what's best for servicing your customers. And there are ways, right? There's always different modes of transportation. There's partial, there's LTL, there's truckload, but based on the cadence of orders, could you shift one mode to another mode for a more effective shipment? Based on the weight, right? Sorry,
I was curious just on that. When you say that, are you thinking people who are like, hey, I'm sending out an LTL every day, and it's like, hey, if this isn't time sensitive, you could hold and wait and send one truckload a week at the end of the week if these are not time sensitive? Is that like an example of how you'd convert modes?
Yeah, as consumers, I think people don't realize how often that happens to us, right? There are a lot of shippers that will hold an order a day or two because they have a truck going that way, and they'll put it on to get to the end consumer. So yeah, that is a strategy that a lot of people use. And, shifting modes, like I said, so 10 parcel shipments could be a pallet, right? An LTL truck will ship much more effective than a parcel shipment. So same concept. If you have a bunch of shipments going in the same direction, maybe some companies have the opportunity to take those shipments from a less efficient mode and make it a more efficient mode. So yeah, I think those are stones, and the key for myself, and I think a lot of other shippers, is continuous education, right? Learning working with your service providers and your partners, and understanding what things they may do for other customers, and see if you can apply it to your own business, because there's a lot out there, and there's something that I learn new every week, and some of them we vet and they don't work out. Some of them we vet and they do work out and we're able to implement. So trying to be a perpetual student of the industry and learn from each other to, again, at the end of the day, it's about our customers and making sure they're getting their products when they need them.
Yeah. And I feel like our exposure to this as the end consumer is shopping on Amazon. Colissa, have you ever shopped on Amazon? And when you click, whether you're Prime or not, you click delivery, and then it's like, hey, we can deliver this today, or you could wait one day and have it tomorrow, or you could wait 3 days and we could put it all on one box for Saturday. Like, have you got that option when you've bought on Amazon before?
Yeah.
What do you do?
It depends on the item, obviously. So if there's something that's urgent, for like, I have a sick dog right now, I'm like, okay, I need to make sure I get him something as soon as possible. So, but for the most part, I try my best to just delay it as long as possible, because managing all of those packages can be really annoying in the house.
So that's why do you make that decision? Because I know they put down there, we can use less boxes and we're more eco-friendly, right? That's their incentive. Like, hey, Jeff, do good. Because at the beginning, they used to offer some financial discount. They used to let me share in the savings. They'd be like, we'll give you 50 cents. And then eventually converted to like, we'll give you $1 of Prime Music. And it's like, well, appreciate it, but not really what I'm looking for. And then now it's the plea on like the emotional of, Jeff, will you be a good human? And so your dog medication is a great example. But like, I ordered solar lights yesterday. And I was like, I kind of just want them now because I want to put them in. Being. But then I said, you know what, Jeff, you can order solar lights online and they get shipped to you. What a time to be alive. Why don't you just shut up and wait till Saturday? And so I did it. I did the right thing. I was the good person, but it's funny how like they make that plea to us, but really on their side of it, like, sure, there's an environmental component, but it reduces their cost too. Like, that's the real play of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's pretty funny that you can see the
like
financial.
That's our example. yeah, right. Like that's our consumer mode, right? That's how we handle LTLs and parcels. Like that's what everyday consumers can kind of like play a role in a little bit.
Yeah, and it's something that you made a great point. We can make that decision to help the industry, right? And I don't think people outside the industry realize that that's what they're going for when they see that. But it really is to ship as efficiently as possible. And there are, like you said, there's the financial reward, there's the economical reward. So there's a lot of benefits.
Yeah, no, I think about that all the time. And same thing when you're buying online, right? And it's like, if you spend just this much, you get free shipping. And it's like, yeah, there's a reason for that, right? Like, because they've got enough margin that they can eat your shipping costs. Like, and there's enough density that they can maybe get a discounted rate on what they're sending you. Like, these are there's real economic factors to this. Somebody didn't just say, oh, $49, give them free shipping. Like, there's some science behind it, and it's based on the cost of the logistics.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The other thing I was really curious about, we chatted a bit and talked about some of these strategies. We talked about like your background coming from an analyst point of view. Like, what are your thoughts on just some of the things in the future where logistics is heading? And that's really broad, so take it wherever you want. But are there certain things where you're like, wow, I think in the future, no one will have a TMS, right? Or we'll have self-driving trucks in 2 years or less? Or what are some of those things you think about? Maybe they're not that extreme, but what are some of those things you think about in the future of where logistics is heading?
Yeah, I think you brought up the economic impacts. I think the environmental factors are starting to come up and starting to surface a little bit more. You're seeing a lot more companies with electric trucks and things of that nature. And there's some regulation now around, increasing regulation around emissions and things like that. So there's going to be a financial impact either way, right? I don't know if we know enough right now to see the full financial impact, but Teslas aren't cheap, so I can't imagine electric trucks are cheap either, right? So I think that there's going to be a cost associated with some of that, and I'm interested to see how quickly the industry gets to that point, right? Because we're all seeing the foundations of it now, and that's really the biggest change that I see coming, and I'm curious to see the impact on where that goes. But the good news for shippers, right, is it could create some more consistency throughout the year, because a lot of times fuel rates create some volatility throughout the year. Even if demand is flat and fuel fluctuates, that's a hard to predict variable, where if things are heading into more electric direction, and, there's some consistency to those costs potentially. So that's what I'm most curious to see as things progress. And the other thing is, I think the past 2 years showed how volatile this industry is. And there's always been, volatility year to year, month to month, and prices change over time. But I don't think anyone saw the swings that we experienced the last 2 years. And I'm not sure we'll ever see them again. Hopefully we don't see them again. But that volatility, I think, has people thinking about risk more. And how to de-risk their supply chain and de-risk their shipments, because there was so much change in the last 2 years in both directions, and it's hard to plan for those things. So approaching your supply chain and approaching your shipments in a more conservative fashion, I think that's going to be a common trend as we go forward.
Yeah, that de-risk comment really resonates with me. Like, hey, just in time is the most efficient, right? Because you're not holding inventories, you're not holding capital. But when you start thinking about it, that's a really risky way to play, right? It's like running your checking account down to zero. You're like, got to keep capital working. It's like, well, until things change, and we find out that humans aren't always the best predictors of the future. So I start thinking about like inventory levels, warehousing, right? And the quantities you keep on hand to kind of de-risk, but finding that balance of still being like efficient with capital, right? Nobody wants you to hold, $10 million of inventory if you can hold $1 million and achieve the same amount of sales, more or less. So yeah, I think that's a really good thing to point out. On the tech space, Colissa, what do you think is more likely to happen at like scale first? Drone delivery or autonomous vehicle delivery, like truck at the full truckload level?
Oh, that's a good one. Well, I haven't really seen much drone delivery happening in the US, but I have heard about it happening in other countries where, they can actually ship medical supplies from, into like really difficult villages to reach there pretty quickly, which is awesome. That's fascinating technology. But in my hometown here, I live in Chandler, Arizona. We have Waymo, who is, I believe it's owned by Google. They do autonomous, basically taxi driving. And I have a neighbor who actually uses them all the time. And we just see this basically a van that drives up, nobody's in the car, and then he just sits in the back seat and drives away. And it's fascinating to watch. So I don't know. I don't know if I can say, but probably autonomous vehicles. At least
is it unsettling to watch that?
It's a little weird, yeah, because we walk in front of it because my husband and I walk around the neighborhood all the time, and sometimes he'll just walk right out in front of it and is it going to slow down? Is it going to stop? Does it wait for you? And then we also own a Tesla, and we play around with the AI, self-driving in quotes.
Right. So this is where I'm curious. If it's just the mode of transportation. So if you walked into the front of, let's say you had full access to your entire airline, you walked into the cockpit and the pilot wasn't there. He's like, hey, I'm just grabbing a quick drink. Would you feel comfortable with that? Because you're familiar that planes are really heavy autopilot. Would you feel comfortable with that? Or would that frighten you too? Or would you be like, no, this is what planes do?
Oh my gosh. I don't know if I could get on that plane, even though I know for a fact that 90% of the flight is flown by the AI or the automation in some way. So yeah, I don't know. That's pretty scary, but
I think if I saw a 53-foot trailer fully loaded with no one driving it, I would be a little on edge for sure.
Yeah, right. The Waymo cars that are rolling around town are typically, so Colissa mentioned the van. I see a lot of 2 and 4 door sedans, a little bit smaller. Certainly could harm a human, but there is a different element of danger with a 53-foot dry van that's 45, 50,000 pounds all in. That starts to get different. So
okay, so I might change my opinion then here. Because I think you do have to take into consideration everyone's kind of fear around that. And I don't think people would be as afraid of, drone delivery if Amazon did that. I mean, it's still kind of weird, having something fly around,
they're more of an irritant, right? A sound and an eyesore, but I'm never worried the drone's going to crash into me and it's going to cause devastating damage to who I am.
Right.
I think Walmart Plus is launching it soon for their deliveries in certain areas. I think I can fact check that for you, but I think I heard that.
What a time to be alive. It's crazy. So we've chatted for, about 45 minutes here. Nick, is there anything you want to leave us with before we go? No pressure.
No, I just thank you guys for what you're doing for the industry. I think it's important that people have conversations and meet at opposite sides of the table. Not necessarily that's what this is, but right, to have conversations with your partners and get information from each other, continue to learn from each other, and make sure that we're doing the industry justice, because no one wants things to be volatile long term. So, thanks for what you're doing to help give people a space to talk and have some of those conversations.
That's awesome. Thanks for your time, Nick. Colissa, any closing thoughts?
No, but I really appreciate your time, Nick. This is awesome. We definitely should have you back and talk through as the industry continues to potentially be volatile. I'd love to see how the future works out for us. So
yeah, we're gonna put an alert next time something crazy happens and I watch container rates spike. We're like, well, let's call Nick and see how he's dealing with it.
Definitely.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. Thanks so much for the time. Another great episode. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.